career.
Well, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, again another special anniversary this year, which is the 60th anniversary of Jaguar's E-Type. We've had a look at the C-Type continuation earlier. Then, of course, came the D-Type, following which the E-Type, which was the most successful car from a production point of view, although they also raced, as we're going to see in a minute, with this fantastic Equipe Endeavour car. But 60 years ago, on March 15th, 1961, the all-new Jaguar E-Type was launched to the public at the Geneva Motor Show. Never had any motor car before, and possibly since created such a wow factor. The order book was immediately filled, and only celebrities and racing drivers could get their hands on one. Jaguar's E-Type was developed as a production road car following their extraordinary achievements on the racetrack, in particular the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where Jaguar C-Types and then D-Types won outright victory no fewer than 5 times during the 1950s. The E-Type has a pedigree like few others. More importantly, at its launch, it was positioned on the market as a relatively affordable production sports car that was less than half the price of an Aston Martin at the time, or 1/3 the price of a Ferrari, but with similar performance. A Jaguar E-Type that could have been yours for just £1,550, I think, plus tax in 1961, assuming you didn't mind joining the very long waiting list.
Now, Jaguar chief Sir William Lyons was the businessman first and foremost, whereas Enzo Ferrari was perhaps more of a sportsman. Now, Ferrari only sold his motor car to the public in order to fund his highly successful racing endeavours, whilst Lyons only went racing in order to promote the quality and reliability of his road-tested motor cars. However, the E-Type took on board many developments and lessons learned on the racetrack, and was an evolution of the D-Type racer and the E-Type prototypes E1A and E2A. Jaguar's chief designer, the unassuming Malcolm Sayer, was an aircraft engineer and an aerodynamicist, and had learned his craft working for Bristol Aeroplane Company during the war. It's not hard to see the influence of aerodynamics and the wind on the E-Type's sensational shape. Many today feel that the early coupe is the most beautiful of all E-Types, but there'll always be something special about top-down, wind-in-the-hair motoring on English country lanes or Californian highways. Enzo Ferrari is said to have once described the E-Type as the most beautiful car ever made.
I would if my microphone was on, I agree. I mean, for sure. And we've got 2 examples at either end of the E-Type production range. They started in 1961, finished in 1974 with the V12 E-Type. The first car that we've got here is known as, we've talked yesterday about how cars have become known by their number plates, but ECD 400 is quite a well-known car. It's the first of 7 roadsters prepared by the factory for racing. And as we said, the early E-Types were delivered to well-known racing drivers. They were taken club racing. Jaguar didn't have an official works department or racing department in 1961, but they were building cars and developing cars, and then of course that evolved into the lightweight E-Type, of which around 12 were built. This car, in fact, is called a specification ZP537 24 project, but they had some modifications. But being a very early car, it has it's identified as a very early car quite quickly because the louvers here weren't pressed into the bonnet. They were in fact a separate panel which was welded into the bonnet. The bonnet locks at the side. This wasn't a design feature. This was just an easy way to open and close the bonnet. Later, you need to use a T-shaped key to open them. But these very early siphonic lock cars, there you go, we've got a T-shaped key to demonstrate. I won't open the bonnet, sir, but thank you. So you don't need to lose that. But of course, what that meant is that these early cars have become increasingly collectible and coveted by collectors. Again, recognisable as a competition car with competition roots. It's got wider wheels at the back. It's got slight flares to the rear. It's got outer-laced wheels as well, rather than standard, meaning that the spokes are more to the outside of the rim, which makes them slightly stronger. Again, a feature of the very early E-Types, there's the aluminium centre console, some very, very rigid and uncomfortable bucket seats. There are numerous features, but this car is presented here in Equipe Endeavour colours. With this, I think it's a very, very pretty car with the white A lot of people call them lipstick, but I don't know many people who wear white lipstick apart from vampires. But the other thing about this car, it also is quite similar to the cars that they use for the 150 mph run. They took out the badge bar. Normally there would be a badge bar in the bonnet here, but that was taken out, and the overriders have been taken off for lightness and also for better aerodynamics. But this is a very, very important car. It's a well-known car. And we're moving on later.
Peter, before you do, I think you should know that the car first raced along the park on the 15th of April 1961, and the car won, driven by a bloke you may have heard of called Graham Hill. So that started the succession of wins, and over the next few years, or the next year or so, it had several results driven by Mike Parks, Jack Sears, Graham Hill again. So in fact it claimed 2 of the first 3 victories that the E-Type enjoyed. So a very important moment.
And it was really, again, through the experiences of those guys on the track, they were making modifications to the car based on racing. There's an excellent book written by Philip Porter that details all of the various changes and the way the suspension was mounted to the body, to the chassis, because of course the E-Type was very advanced in terms of its disc brakes all round, but it's also a monocoque construction, really designed by Malcolm Sayer, who we mentioned earlier, who was a great aerodynamicist, but the E-Type was designed around a strong tub, and then the engine was mounted in a frame at the front. And a lot of that were lessons learned on the track, because it meant you could quite easily change an engine by just removing the entire front of the car, and the rear axle can be dropped out of the car. All very helpful if you're on a racetrack. The lightweight E-Type, as I said, it did race at Le Mans, and we've talked extensively about those cars. But just moving back, Richard, I think you had one of these. You could probably talk with authority on V12 E-Types.
I had a couple of V12 E-Types in the day, yes. I paid the princely sum of some £5,500 for my first E-Type coupe, and then had to pay nearly £8,000 for the soft top. But the V12 E-Type for me was just a dream. I went onto the motor show stand the last time the E-Type was showed in 1975, I think, at Earl's Court, and I felt that one day, if I could manage it, I'd have to buy one of these, and I'm very fortunate to have 2. But as you say, it's an astonishing, good-looking soft top here with fixed roof, hard top as well. But I'm sure you know more about it than I do.
Well, I mean, I was just going to, so as we're talking about the 60th anniversary, the evolution of the E-Type, this car had a 3.8 litre 6-cylinder engine, which was straight out of the D-Type racer, effectively, but slightly different setup and carburetors. Later in production, they built a coupe version, which some might argue is as pretty, some might argue prettier than the Roadster, but of course, wind in the air motoring was what it was all about. And you can see on that car as well the straight-through exhaust pipes. Between the 3.8 E-Type Roadsters of 1961 through to 1964, the engine was enlarged to 4.2 litres, the seating got a bit more comfortable, but they overall, Jaguar built over 70,000 E-Types, I think 90% of which went to the US market. And that's really why this car came about. There were increasing challenges. They've developed this fantastic new V12 engine, and it was put into the E-Type. It was lengthened, it was widened, it had wider wheel arches, and this is a beautiful example that hasn't suffered too much the American legislation changes, because what was happening, because it was their biggest market, they were adding rubber overriders and all sorts of other changes. Again, the headlights are no longer covered, they're open, and that really is for safety, because you couldn't, whilst these headlights with the covered glass at the front may look pretty, it dispersed the lights on motorways and things like that and made it quite difficult to drive. So the V12 E-Type, also you can see the spinners, they're now fixed with, well, they're not really spinners, they're fixed with a spanner, because it was another safety measure rather than being hammered on. But as you rightly say, Richard, it's a much longer cockpit, but very desirable. In fact, during the Casasarco of 1989, it was the V12 E-Type which was in fact most coveted and most valuable. It was this model, in fact, that everyone wanted to own. It's now reversed, and it's the very early cars that seem to be more collectible.
But at the time, as you say, more cylinders, more flash was more attractive. And certainly, obviously, any of these now have seen a huge increase in their value over the years. But whilst the purists were now looking at the early cars as being the most iconic, the V12s has continued to be universally popular.
I think from an engineering point of view, I mean, Jaguar didn't cut any corners with the V12. It was intended to be as good as the previous cars. But what was happening, it was safety legislation, also of course the fuel crisis, and it was having an impact on these cars being sold to the US and to the European market. But E-types now can be restored to the sort of condition. We talked earlier with CMC, that's one of the, this is one of the cars that they specialise in. Sadly, they did suffer from rust, particularly in the 1970s when many were neglected. But I have to say, 60 years on, it's still a modern style, it's still beautiful. For my mind, it's unbeatable.
And we're so delighted that these two cars have come up, and there's obviously a strong presence of E-types here today. We've got a couple of great cars in the main concourse, which you can see out in the concourse field here. But to have these two cars brought up, good examples of different eras of the E-type, is great to see. And I'm sure there's a number of celebrations, which you'll be part of it, you're an E-type. But there's been celebrations in the last year or so around the world to celebrate these iconic motor cars. And the retelling of it, Philip Porter was telling us, the retelling of the story again over the mad drive to get the car to Geneva in time for the launch has just reawakened that magical history of the
Norman Dewis's
drive, yeah.
And you know, we had earlier Michael Quinn here. He's Sir William Lyons' grandson, so and he owns an E-type himself. There's a great tradition in the family. This gentleman just showed me a picture of him with Sir William Lyons and Lady Lyons back in, which year was that, sir? In 1978. So and Jaguar owners are very, very proud of the marque's heritage. And you know, this is a long-legged, fast touring car, sports car, but I mean, the V12 engine, silky smooth, as long as you can find the fuel stations en route. What do you get on? About 9 miles to the gallon?
Is that coming through?
One owner car.
Well, that's, I mean, that's the spirit. I think it's great to hear that, you know, you were saying, so 9 miles in town and about 18 on a run. Not too bad. I don't drive it in town too often. And this is a manual. They did also introduce an automatic gearbox for the later models, but as well as a 2+2. There was a trend towards the sort of mid to late 60s. Really, many people who'd owned sports cars, they were having families and felt the need to have a bit of space in the back, and Jaguar joined the others and built the 2+2 E-type, although perhaps a little bit ungainly in its looks, just to accommodate a bit more space in the back. But this is one end of the spectrum, this is the other end of the spectrum, and I think equally beautiful.
They are, and thank you to both. Thank you to Paul Vesey for allowing this lovely car to come along. We appreciate that. Thank you, sir. A lovely one-owner V12 from new. That's perfect to have it, and I guess it describes the passion behind the ownership of these wonderful motor cars. So, well done to Jaguar E-types for celebrating so well, and thank you for bringing these two lovely cars and others to the concourse here at Hampton Court to celebrate the anniversary. Thank you both.
I don't know if that was a sales thing or just a...